Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times, a Prancing Pony podcast production. I'm the Man of the West. It's time to keep week 78 going with Túrin Turambar Tuesday. Now, last week we spent time with Túrin and his outlaw buddies. Today, it's time we visit Mîm in his humble halls. On the next day, they set out thither, following Mîm to Amon Rûdh. Now, that hill stood upon the edge of the moorlands that rose between the vales of Sirion and Narog, and high above the stony heath it reared its crown. But its steep grey head was bare, save for the red saragon that mantled the stone. And as the men of Túrin's band drew near, the sun, westering, broke through the clouds, and fell upon the crown, and the saragon was all in flower. Then one among them said, "There is blood on the hilltop." But Mîm led them by secret paths up the steep slopes of Amon Rûdh, and at the mouth of his cave he bowed to Túrin, saying, "Enter into Baran Danwith, the house of ransom, for so it shall be called." And now there came another dwarf, bearing light to greet him, and they spoke together, and passed swiftly down into the darkness of the cave. But Túrin followed after, and came at length to a chamber far within, lit by dim lamps hanging upon chains. There he found Mîm kneeling at a stone couch beside the wall, and he tore his beard and wailed, crying one name unceasingly. And on the couch there lay a third. But Túrin, entering, stood beside Mîm and offered him aid. Then Mîm looked up at him and said, "You can give no aid, for this is Kim, my son, and he is dead, pierced by an arrow. He died at sunset, even my son has told me." Then pity rose in Túrin's heart, and he said to Mîm, "Alas, I would recall that shaft if I could. Now, Baran Danwith, this house shall be called in truth, and if ever I come to any wealth, I will pay you a ransom of gold for your son, in token of sorrow, though it gladden your heart no more." Then Mîm rose and looked long at Túrin. "I hear you," he said. "You speak like a dwarf lord of old, and at that I marvel. Now my heart is cooled, though it is not glad, and in this house you may dwell if you will, for I will pay my ransom." So began the abiding of Túrin in the hidden house of Mîm upon Amon Rûdh, and he walked on the greensward before the mouth of the cave, and looked out east and west and north. Northward he looked, and descried the forest of Brethil, climbing green about Amon Obel in its midst. And thither his eyes were drawn ever and again, he knew not why. For his heart was set rather to the northwest, where league upon league away, on the skirts of the sky, it seemed to him that he could glimpse the mountains of shadow, the walls of his home. But at evening, Túrin looked west into the sunset, as the sun rode down red into the hazes above the distant coasts, and the vale of Narog lay deep in the shadows between. In the time that followed, Túrin spoke much with Mîm, and sitting with him alone he listened to his lore and the tale of his life. For Mîm came of the dwarves that were banished in ancient days from the great dwarf cities of the east, and long before the return of Morgoth they wandered westward into Beleriand. But they became diminished in stature and in smithcraft, and they took to lives of stealth, walking with bowed shoulders and furtive steps. Before the dwarves of Nogrod and Belagost came west over the mountains, the elves of Beleriand knew not what these others were, and they hunted them and slew them. But afterwards they let them alone, and they were called Noigith Nibin, the petty dwarves in the Sindarin tongue. They loved none but themselves, and if they feared and hated the orcs, they hated the Eldar no less, and the exiles most of all. For the Noldor, they said, had stolen their lands and their homes. Long ere King Finrod Felagund came over the sea, the caves of Nargothrond were discovered by them, and by them its delving was begun. And beneath the crown of Amon Rûdh, the bald hill, the slow hands of the petty dwarves had bored and deepened the caves through the long years that they dwelt there, untroubled by the grey elves of the woods. But now at last they had dwindled and died out of Middle-earth, all save Mîm and his 2 sons. And Mîm was old even in the reckoning of dwarves, old and forgotten. And in the halls the smithies were idle, and the axes rusted, and their name was remembered only in ancient tales of Doriath and Nargothrond. But when the year drew on to midwinter, snow came down from the north heavier than they had known it in the river vales, and Amon-Ruth was covered deep, and they said that the winters worsened in Beleriand as the power of Angband grew. Then only the hardiest dare stir abroad, and some fell sick, and all were pinched with hunger. But in the dim dusk of a winter's day, there appeared suddenly among them a man, as it seemed, of great bulk and girth, cloaked and hooded in white, and he walked up to the fire without a word. And when men sprang up in fear, he laughed and threw back his hood, and beneath his wide cloak he bore a great pack, and in the light of the fire Túrin looked again on the face of Beleg Cuthalion. Thus Beleg returned once more to Túrin, and their meeting was glad, and with him he brought out of Dimbar the dragon helm of Dorlomin, thinking that it might lift Túrin's thought again above his life in the wilderness as the leader of a petty company. But still Túrin would not return to Doriath, and Beleg, yielding to his love against his wisdom, remained with him, and did not depart. And in that time he labored much for the good of Túrin's company. Those that were hurt or sick he tended, and gave to them the lembas of Melian, and they were quickly healed. For though the grey elves were less in skill and knowledge than the exiles from Valinor, in the ways of the life of Middle-earth they had a wisdom beyond the reach of men. And because Beleg was strong and enduring, far-sighted in mind as in eye, he came to be held in honor among the outlaws. But the hatred of Mim for the elf that had come into Baran Danwith grew ever greater, and he sat with Ibun his son in the deepest shadows of his house, speaking to none. But Túrin paid now little heed to the dwarf, and when winter passed and spring came, they had sterner work to do. Now, the story of Mim the dwarf is a truly tragic one in the middle of yet another tragedy, essentially the last of his kind, a people that were hunted by the elves at first. And now his son is dead because one of Túrin's men was trigger-happy. Now, to his credit, Túrin, who we'll see doesn't always demonstrate empathy, really does seem moved by this sorrow, and essentially promises him a weregild without using the word here. And so we have a ransom for a ransom, as Túrin lives in Mim's halls. As the end of the year approaches, Túrin and the Outlaws, which is another great band name, by the way, receive a visitor, none other than Beleg Cuthalion himself. And for this, I actually want to conclude with a bit from the full version of the story in The Children of Húrin at the end of Chapter 7 of Mim the Dwarf. After Beleg gives him the helm of Hador, Túrin goes quiet, until suddenly he caught the gleam of another thing that Beleg held in his hand. It was the gift of Melian, but the silver leaves were red in the firelight, and when Túrin saw the seal, his eyes darkened. "What have you there?" he said. "The greatest gift that one who loves you still has to give," answered Beleg. "Here is lembas in Elith, the waybread of the Eldar that no man has yet tasted." "The helm of my fathers I take with good will for your keeping," said Túrin, "but I will not receive gifts out of Doriath." "Then send back your sword and your arms," said Beleg. "Send back also the teaching and fostering of your youth, and let your men, who you say have been faithful, die in the desert to please your mood. Nonetheless, this waybread was a gift not to you, but to me, and I may do with it as I will. Eat it not if it sticks in your throat, but others may be more hungry and less proud." Túrin's eyes glinted, and as he looked in Beleg's face, the fire in them died, and they went gray. And he said in a voice hardly to be heard, "I wonder, friend, that you deign to come back to such a churl. From you I will take whatever you give, even rebuke. Henceforward you shall counsel me in all ways, save the road to Doriath only." Folks, for now, this wraps up this week's Turambar Tuesday. Be sure to join me again next week as Morgoth learns of the two captains and Mim betrays Túrin. In the meantime, please visit patreon.com/TolkienTimes to learn how you can join the Content Council and be a part of deciding what I talk about each series. You can also support the show, get an ad-free feed, and even a bonus episode every week. And please join me again tomorrow on today's Tolkien Times for Word Nerd Wednesday. Podcast listeners, please be sure to subscribe to the TTT in your podcast apps. Maybe throw me a review or a rating. And for those on YouTube, subscribe to the channel to get all of the BPP productions, including my new streaming project. And be sure you're following @PrancingPonyPod on all your social media. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.